Ruth Dyson.
Mr Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to allow me to contribute to the second reading of the Canterbury Earthquake Response and Recovery Bill. I want to begin by acknowledging again the two ministers who have led this process, Jerry Brownlee and John Carter. Mr Speaker, in the earlier part of this debate, when I spoke, I did raise some concerns and questions alongside my genuine commendation of both those ministers. I think that both Jerry Brownlee and John Carter have not only worked hard and diligently to get agreement for the progress of this legislation, but have been very genuine in the way that they have worked with other people. Some people can be bipartisan when it suits them, but actually I think in this specific incident, the attempt for not bipartisan but multi-partisan support was absolutely genuine from both those ministers. I want that to continue through the remaining stages of this bill, and that's why I would urge the minister whose name is on the bill to take the opportunity to take a call in the second reading and answer, perhaps not all, but at least some of the concerns and questions that were raised in the first reading. Honourable Jerry Brownlee has not taken a call yet, and the time is running out for him to do so in the second reading. Mr Speaker, you will know, as all members of this House do, that it is a lot easier for members of Parliament to make mistakes when they are working under serious time constraints and under the pressure that a committee stage of the House generates. It is my view that we should use the second reading stage to air the concerns we have, to raise the concerns we have, to ask the questions that we have unanswered, and hopefully for the Minister to then use this time before we start the committee stage to give serious consideration to those concerns and hopefully express support for resolving them through amendments to the legislation, or at least answering the questions even if there isn't agreement. But at the moment we're left with some frustration that the Minister hasn't done that, and I really urge him to do that before the second reading time is complete. Mr Speaker, there is no doubt at all that everyone in this country wants to support Canterbury rebuilding in the most efficient way possible. It's also clear that Canterbury's in a state of shock at the moment. We have spent the last 10 days trying to get the essentials of life, quite literally, reconnected to our constituents. Many people are still without power, are still without sewage, are using portaloos on the footpath outside their homes. That's better than some of the alternatives that had to be employed earlier in the week, but it's not a great way to live, Mr Speaker, and we want those issues in infrastructure as well as people's businesses and their lives to get back as much as possible to post-quake normality. It will be different than pre-quake normality, but we're certainly nowhere near that. So we have been really focused on getting the essentials of life reconnected to our constituents. We haven't had the opportunity to say, what is the bigger picture now? Where do we want to go in the future? What will our city look like in 10 or 30 or 50 or 100 years' time? What will fill the spaces in our streets where buildings will be demolished or where buildings have already been demolished? What do we want Canterbury to look like? So, Mr Speaker, it's my view that we have to have a genuine commitment from our city leaders and our parliamentarians to ensure that this legislation does not block our voice being heard in that debate about what our city and our province looks like in the future. But we haven't yet heard that commitment from Minister Brownlee, and I'm keen to hear it. This is an extreme bill. It is done out of a genuine interest to speed things up for our recovery. I have no doubt about that, but it is extreme. It removes the legislative framework of 22 acts of Parliament. Legislation is suspended and replaced by order in council. I assume that it will be used on rare occasions, but there is nothing in the bill that requires that. there is complete power given to the ministers. That is a big step for this Parliament to take. The appointment of commissioners is again seen as a way to have more collaboration and more fast-tracking of the process of rebuilding within the different territorial local authorities, and nobody could argue against collaboration and efficiency, and I certainly wouldn't be one who would attempt to do that. But in this process, there is no public accountability and there's no transparency. The commissioners are not subject to the ordinary provisions of the local government legislation, nor the Official Information Act. There is no input from the public into their process of consideration or even as spectators in their meetings. So those are quite small requirements that if the Minister thought worthy of consideration, he could respond and say, yes, perhaps we would include that as an amendment during the committee stages. And as I mentioned in the first reading speech, there is not even a skill set described. What sort of people, what type of representation, what sort of skills would we expect the commissioners to have? Again, it may seem quite a small point, but actually if we get the wrong people, we're in a lot of bother. We might not even agree with the process, as we certainly didn't with the ECAN abolition, but actually even in that legislation we had a description of the skills that would be required in the commissioners who were replacing our democratically elected regional councillors. So that was even a step further than this. And obviously another glaring omission in this bill, Mr Speaker, is there's no regulatory impact statement. I presume because of the haste in which it was put together, but I do think that's often a consideration that is taken very seriously by this Parliament. That is the purpose of a regulatory impact statement, and in this bill there's none at all. Mr Speaker, today in the press, our former Mayor, Gary Moore, put in a very thought-provoking article. He's a person who has always had and always demonstrated a genuine passion for our city and for the people of our city. His views were often provocative to a debate, and I think he enjoyed that even more because he's a good debater and loves to provoke thinking about the future of our city. But he said in today's press, central and local government should remember at this stage that they are public servants. They need to make haste slowly. Rushing legislation or bylaws could mean that they have to be reversed when flaws in what they have passed start emerging. So, Mr Speaker, there is no doubt that there is a need to support efficient processing of the various bits of the law that currently need to be enacted in order to progress Canterbury's recovery. This is an extreme way of doing it. It's not like an amendment which allows more flexibility. It's actually revoking that legislation and replacing it with order in council. So it's a big step to ask. What I am asking is that the Minister takes an opportunity in the second reading, comes to the House and takes a call so that we can have some of those concerns debated and considered and some of our questions answered.
Call Dr. Russell.